Frank has told us a little bit about the technical issues in providing location information in mobile networks. Paul has talked a little bit about applications of these location data, commercial applications. My very brief talk will be about whether you can actually design these applications and still be more or less privacy friendly, which is, I think, a very important thing to do. So I'm going to sort of review these applications of location tracking, not in any specifics, but on certain types of application that we can recognize. See how these different types of applications could be implemented and how much erosion of privacy you have for each of these applications. And then the last slide will be about my position in this debate. As far as I can, in my opinion, there's only 4 types of different kinds of applications that you would have. Of course, topmost would be 911, kind of emergency rescue, emergency services. That would allow emergency services to locate persons or things. Because, and second, of course, travel and tourism. If you're somewhere abroad, you want information about the local situation, you want maps, you want the pizza restaurant or whatever, then that kind of application will give you that kind of information. The third one is customer service. Service, well, depends on what you think is service. Advertisement, some people say that's service. Billing, is that service? I sort of put it in this catch-all thing. Maybe even tracking your car and see whether you're speeding, which has been done by certain US car rental companies. Although you could also put that under surveillance, which is the last category, which is, well, for police kind of stuff. So these kind of applications we have. Now the question is, what kind of location information do you need? What kind of location information is really required to implement these types of applications? And how bad is that to our privacy? Now, in my mind, just location information by itself is not really that privacy sensitive. It's only if it's bound to a certain individual that it becomes privacy sensitive. So it's always these 2 things that have to be combined. And also, the level of privacy erosion, if you like, it depends on the precision of the location information. So depending on the technologies being used, as Frank explained, you get more or less privacy erosion. Now for 911 kind of services, you want to have pretty good location information, and you usually also want to have that information bound to the individual being in an emergency situation. So there's not much more than you can do than just piggyback all this information on the call through the operator to the service, either operated by the operator itself or by an emergency response team kind of thing. For customer services, travel and tourism, most of these applications, as Frank outlined, you only the query only involves the location information and not whether Frank is issuing this request, or Paul is issuing this request, or I am issuing that request. Who cares? Who is looking for the pizza? It's only that somebody is there looking for a pizza in Enschede or at the campsite here. So you can just decouple the location data from the identity data. Maybe in certain cases, if you're talking like weather forecasts and stuff like that, which is also local information, you can actually broadcast that in the cells. So there's not even any point in the handheld giving away information about the location. And in the last case, surveillance, well, of course, there's full harvesting of the data. That's an option. But then again, if you look at what kind of data is being used by the police and stuff like that, they want information about only certain handsets. Now, I mean, this is a hypothetical situation, but even in these cases, you could consider that all the handsets are required to have a secure logging mechanism that just the location data in the handset without publishing it to the network, and still allowing the police to look at this data if they had an injunction or whatever to get access to this handset and query it. instead of just collecting all this data in central databases. Because only if it's collected in central databases is it really becoming a large problem. So, in my mind, there's actually a lot of ways to design these location information services and still not being all that privacy unfriendly. You can do this. Okay, in certain cases, maybe perhaps you have to give location information and identification information. In that case, for instance, in 911 emergency situations, I would vote for an opt-in instead of an opt-out kind of system. So I don't give this information except if I agree to do this. And perhaps, well, for emergency services, it would be very bad if you didn't opt in, right? Okay, thank you. That's my talk.
I'm Gus Hossain. For all of you who are jet lagged here today, please don't make too much noise if you fall over when you fall asleep if I'm talking, and I'll try to do the same because I'm very jet lagged too. I'm here to speak about the privacy implications. Well, basically, how location tracking is held for privacy. I teach at a university in the UK, and I'm with Privacy International. If you want more information on any of this stuff, just go to my website, which I'll show you later as well. Wow, can't see that at all. I'm basically covering 4 issues. The last one the least, because I want to leave it as an open issue for you to consider later. The first thing I'm going to discuss is the definition of what exactly traffic data is. Does traffic data consist of location data or does it not? And if so, what are the legal repercussions when the police show up at the mobile phone operator's location and ask for my location data? How do we treat traffic data? That is, do we preserve it? Do we retain it? Do we detain it? Do we destroy it? So on and so forth. And that's changing pretty drastically as the law catches up. And what does this mean for due process? That is, what exactly do law enforcement agents have to provide in order to gain access to your location data or your traffic data? Is it like in the old days, they just have to show up and ask? Or do they need a warrant? Do they need a signed warrant? Do they need a judicial warrant? And the last issue I'm going to just raise slightly is, when did traffic data not become communications data? Traffic data in the internet era means a lot more than it used to be. Same goes for transactional data, that is what we call lifestyle data, what you click on, what you search for, so on and so forth. There's this wonderful Trojan horse called updating. We must update our laws to be on top of the latest technological developments. Law enforcement uses that all the time. That's how they rationalize the Clipper chip. That's how they rationalize CALIA, so on and so forth. Big Trojan horse. Well, there are some good areas and there are some bad areas. First, updating traditional laws such as data protection. As was mentioned earlier, location data technically isn't covered yet under data protection laws within Europe. Well, they're in the process of changing that. In the US, there's some discussion about changing the Cable Act, which makes it relatively illegal to gain access to which channels you watch. Well, they want to update that for the internet era because you can now use cable to connect to your provider. And then there's the whole idea of updating powers. That's what Clipper was, that's what CALIA is, or CALIA was and is. The EU is trying to update its powers with Communication 890, which I'll get into a little later. The Council of Europe is doing a wonderfully fantastic job of updating the powers of all countries on this earth, well, 43 countries to start with. And the G8, well, we all know about the G8. Okay, you all know this bit. Basically, traffic data in the old days, the plain old telephone system was very simple. Who you called, when you called them, how long you spoke for. Well, when you deal with packet switching, it's a little different. Is it about email? Well, okay, if it's about email, who you emailed, who you received email from, how large, when, so on and so forth. But if it goes beyond email, it's about which websites did you visit, which protocols did you use, what did you search for, so on and so forth. Anything that doesn't qualify as content is considered traffic. Well, location fits under that. And yes, in mobile telephony, it's all of the above plus location. Council of Europe is working on a draft convention on cybercrime. Working on it is a bit of a misnomer. Actually, it's pretty much done. It's about to be signed in September. And in this convention, they define traffic data basically as anything that's not communications data. That is, traffic data means any computer data relating to a communication by means of a computer system, generated by a computer system that formed a part in the chain of communication, indicating the communication's origin, destination, route, time, date, size, duration, or type of underlying service. And later on, they say, yes, this does include location data. And they later create a power. That is the power to order production of this data from the service operator, which is the production and preservation powers. And that includes any information available to identify the custodian of the stored computer data or the location of the computer system. Yes, this does cover mobile telephony. And no, it does not require judicial warrant. Actually, they don't even mention anything about warrants within the whole process. Last August, in the UK, the NSIS, National Criminal Intelligence Service, released unintentionally a report. It was an appalling report. Basically, the report's aim was to try to convince the government to have a policy of retaining all traffic data for a period of 7 years. Unintentionally got released after the infamous UK Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, the RIP Act, was passed. And a lot of controversy came out of this. And what's interesting is what they consider to be traffic data. Again, it's all of the above. What is it here? The report is quoted to say, we should not restrict ourselves by trying to define the type of data required for law enforcement. Instead, the report says, we should include everything, including subscriber data, including location data, including caller ID, including internet-related data, internet-related data, including routing logs, dynamic internet protocol address allocation, etc. Anything that's not a communication, anything that's not content, falls under traffic data. And this report said we need it for 7 years. Ironically, they justified the 7-year number by saying, well, that's what the Criminal Clearinghouse wanted because to help clear people of crimes they've been found guilty for when they're actually innocent. This is the EU communication 890. It's ironically entitled Creating a Safer Information Society. This came out in January of this year, and it discusses, amongst other things, interception and access to traffic data. In this situation, of course, access to traffic data is rationalized because there are some really nasty child pornographers out there. And although the European Union is really concerned about privacy, we must do something about these child pornographers, and access to traffic data is the key tool for law enforcement. But of course, there's two different models that governments and intergovernmental organizations are going towards. The first is what we call preservation. Preservation of traffic data means if I'm suspected of something bad, maybe just freaking a phone or trading child pornography with Maurice, as I usually do, all the police have to do is ask my mobile phone operator or ask my ISP to start preserving all the information they have on me, including what they already have. So all the data they've been keeping for the past 30 days, plus all my future communications for a set period of time. Okay, that's problematic. Fine, we'll let that one go for now. The other idea they have is something called retention, and that is, in line with the UK NSIS report, you must keep all traffic data for a set period of time. This flies right in the face of data protection law. Data protection law says the moment a company no longer needs that data, we must get rid of that. Well, the COE, the Council of Europe Convention, only asks for preservation. That was after a long fight of us saying, no, we cannot demand retention. It contradicts at least European data protection law. The G8, meanwhile, the G8 who doesn't really care about anything we have to say, the G8 says, no, we're going to go for retention. And they keep on trying to push for retention, but unsuccessfully. They've been meeting with the industry a great deal. The industry's been pushing back. If you want to hear more about that, I'll be discussing it later on this afternoon. And this wonderful data protection laws that we have, well, actually, they're about to be watered down unless something happens. The European Parliament in September, right at the beginning of the session, is going to vote on a proposal to change the Telecom Data Protection Directive. That they're trying to update for location data, for electronic services, so on and so forth, but change it so that the requirement to delete data once it's no longer needed by the company is removed. Law enforcement, particularly from the UK and the Netherlands, I believe, and Sweden of all places, have been pushing to water down the Data Protection Directive to get rid of the destruction requirement so that law enforcement can gain access to it, so that national legislatures can change their laws in order to allow for retention, which is currently illegal. The sun is coming out, so you can't quite see, I can't even quite see what that quotation is, but it's basically from a G8 document from the Tokyo Summit that just occurred in May this year. And it's completely in line with what's going on at the European Parliament level. The document basically says, we must ensure that data protection legislation, as implemented, takes into account public safety and other social values. We have no clue what other social values is, but we know that law enforcement is speaking about data retention. We must change data protection legislation to meet our interests. A wonderful case arose back in 1996 or 1997 when the Swiss Data Protection Registrar realized that one of the Swiss mobile phone companies was retaining data on all their users, all the location and traffic data. And because no law at that time covered location data, the police just had to show up and ask very nicely for the location data, tracing back to 6 months. No warrant, no notice, nothing signed. They just needed to show up and ask very kindly. And the Swiss Data Protection Registrar couldn't find fault with what the police were doing, and couldn't find fault with what the mobile phone company was doing, because there was no law. And this is going to happen more and more until a law is made. A law, though, requires 3 key aspects. First, is access to retained data or preserved data proportional to the crime that's committed? And is it specific to an individual and to a crime? Is it actually necessary, is the second clause? Is it key to your investigation? And last of all is this issue of due process. Who's asking for the records? Is it just for civil law or is it for criminal law? Is it for common law or is it just purely law enforcement access? And who's authorizing it? Is it just the head of police signing a warrant? Well, that's how it is in the UK right now. Is it a judge signing a warrant? Well, it's not like that anywhere in the world right now, so why should we expect it to be better? And the first case of all of this dates back to the U.S. Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act back in the early 90s, early to mid-90s, when the debate was occurring. The law requires that all telephony service providers create a set capability. Then the law started changing. That is, we must deal with mobile phones as well. We must deal with the 911 emergency calls. What if we need to find out somebody's location? Or, well, there are all these criminals using mobile phones. We need to find their locations too. So it was scope creep. Classic case of scope creep. And so the FBI created a requirement that all communications must identify locations, both at the beginning and the end of a conversation, to the nearest cell tower. A few privacy groups took this idea to court, and the DC Circuit Court stated that fine, there's nothing really wrong with that, but the powers must be authorized and overseen by greater scrutiny than they have been in the past with the plain old telephone system. Plain old telephone system, getting access to traffic data is not difficult. But the DC Court of Appeals said, hold on, when it comes to location data, when it comes to mobile phone traffic data, we need to make sure there's greater oversight. What does that mean? Does it mean we're going to have a judge overseeing the process? We don't know. Nothing has been decided yet. The FBI hasn't come forward with its latest developments. And this is the last issue. Is traffic data as sensitive as communications data? Is who I call, where I am, which websites I visit, what protocols I use, what I search for, is that as valuable as content data? That is what I say, what are in my emails. And a lot of the privacy advocates out there say, well, actually, it's more valuable than what you say. What you search for, what you actually look at on the internet, is more sensitive than what you actually say. It's the equivalent of the face recognition cameras all over the place, but actually looking at your eyes. But law enforcement's not catching on to that idea. They want to maintain the same old cars they had before, with the same old oversight they had before, which was minimal. And when did a session, a connected session to the internet, become considered as a communication? I think it's because of the whole, you need to use a modem which involved a telephone line connection to the internet. But when we talk about interception of communications, we should be discussing emails only. Whoever said that law enforcement had to get access to my connected session? That is a problem that hasn't been addressed sufficiently. And as a result, we're going to get just at the most judicial oversight over our connected sessions. Or in the UK, when there's an interception of communications, there is no judicial warrant. It's signed by a politician. So with the Council of Europe Convention, with the G8, with the European Parliament, European Commission, the European Union moving towards access to traffic data, no matter what this traffic data is, and not requiring minimal oversight, things are only going to get worse. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I must apologize for the quality of the beamer. I hope we can change that in the course of the day. Let me give a brief digest of what we heard till now. So location data, the development of the use of location data is very market driven, but it seems that it's more law enforcement used till now. We have a major privacy invasion through location data, through a lack of design of the networks. But the good news is we can also build very useful and cool applications on top of that lack of design. But the interesting question is, of course, can you develop networks, can you design networks that take privacy more serious and still do the same interesting, cool things? Well, that would be the challenge for people who develop networks like these. So I think from Paul's talk, we learned that there's a very large amount of very useful applications, possible applications that people would like to use, and that there is actually a privacy concern among users, because that was not really clear to me yet, that users were really concerned. Frank Reeder showed us the very strong market drive behind the development, and particularly interesting I thought was the 9/11 requirements in the United States, which will of course be a very strong drive behind the use of location data. And also he showed us that there are much more technology road bumps in the way for really using location data, much more road bumps than I thought there were till now. From Jaap-Henk Koopman we learned that you can actually think of very good privacy design solutions. You just need to be willing to look for them, and you need to be willing to use them. And from Gus, I think
the story about law enforcement use of location data, forensic use of location data, we can see again that countries are updating their laws to new technology, and while they do that, they don't reconsider the powers that those new law enforcement possibilities give. And we also saw from Gus' talk that traffic data became a very large collection of very different kinds of data. And that family of data now seems to include location data, and that has very important implications for the lawful access that police forces have to that data. And we can see that the traditional division between traffic data and content data, when you talk about telecommunications, is really not an appropriate distinction anymore. There are more classes of data. And Gus also gave us some insight in the battle that is going on inside the European Union at the moment between those who want to respect privacy law and those who want to give new law enforcement powers. Let me now ask the panel if they would like to respond on each other's presentations or have remarks on each other's presentations, or a few general remarks after hearing these four presentations. Gus, you want to? Yeah? No? No?
Okay. Yes. One thing on the designing networks in the way that is more privacy reliant for the customer. The key thing is if you can design the location provision in a way that the customer has the ultimate control about the data, really the control about the data in his telephone. And all the network operators have no economic incentive to do so. Because what they want to have is a huge pool of data that they can use about their customers, even if it is only for statistical data or for network optimization or whatever. These are the harmless things. And so, in my opinion, the network operators are not in any way going to implement networks in the next generation mobile phones. They give the control to the customer. What they want to do, of course, is giving the customer the feeling that he has the control. That means what they will do on the application level is, at least for the first applications, that the customer has to agree to say, okay, I want to be tracked by my friends, or if I want to find the pizza parlor now and then, I need to set up my location in order to have the biggest location base. So this will be the first thing, but don't be fooled. The real data is with the operator, and the operator has, nobody can control the operator in reality. So the operator can do what he wants, and in his power is it what kind of data he gives to the content provider or to the service provider. So from a technical point of view, the simple thing would be to say, okay, I triangulate the position in the telephone and give the power of sending the location data to the operator to the user, but that would prevent a lot of interesting applications like friend finder thing. If I all the time, when a friend wants to find me, need to acknowledge, okay, this friend can have that won't work. So what we're doing is saying, okay, you can submit a list of friends that can know where I am, and so then they need to track it all the time. So at this moment, there are some delays in the implementation of the technology that I tried to outline that will work in the direction that it takes a little bit longer to have real-time tracking of all the customers. Because especially at the large operators, we have about 20 million to 25 million customers that need to be tracked by one system. And the problem is not the amount of data, but the amount of calculation, network traffic, and database traffic in the backend that needs to be processed there. So it will take 1 or 2 years until the big operators are able to do it, especially that. But don't be fooled. At least with the advent of UMTS, there will be real-time tracking of all customers and all mobile networks. It only depends on the policy of the operator, what kind of data is going on from your telephone or from your location to everybody.
Yeah. Let me just comment on what you said and what Gus said. Basically, listening to Gus's talk, you will realize that whenever there is data around, government will want to have some grip on that, wants to have some access to it. So basically, I think you can either press government to say you shouldn't do that. I think the better angle would be just don't collect the data. Make sure you don't collect the data, which basically means that you have to press the telecom operators to not collect this data, or at least spread this data from at least outside the network, or perhaps not even from their mobile, depending on their policies. So basically, the pressure should be on the telecom operators for not having these kind of policies that just collect all this data. Because there is no commercial need to do so. I mean, all these applications that you want to design, you can do it in a way that is much more privacy friendly than just collect all the data that you can get.
Yeah, in reality, from talking to the telecom operators, which is my day-to-day business, they're not inclined to give into any program that will diminish the UMTS profits. So, it's very possible that in the big countries, at least one operator will try to use privacy as something like an unique sales point, saying, okay, we are going to provide you a location that serves possibly a little bit less good service than other operators, but we guarantee your privacy. And that is possible, and at least I try to make that point in every talk that I have to a mobile operator. But in reality, these applications are driven by clueless marketing droids that have really no sense for privacy, that they have a really hateful relationship to privacy laws and privacy requirements. And so I'm not very optimistic about convincing these providers. I think that the next year or 2 years, if we sit together again, we will need to talk about how to circumvent being located. So and I think that one thing that needs to be thought about now is how we can set up, for instance, schedule systems for exchanging prepaid card anonymously and things like that to prevent being the location data associated with persons. And the mobile operators are not going to be the ones that push the privacy in that area. There are at least 2 points that we need to work on. One thing is the application technology. If we can provide technology that doesn't need location data all the time, that doesn't need to associate location data with persons, then it's one thing, because we offer technology alternative to the operators instead of doing it all in a privacy sensitive way. And the second thing is also pressing on the law side. So at least what I can say from Germany is that lobbying the government and lobbying the people in parliament do show effect. So it is really busy work, and it doesn't make any fun, because you need to race through that kind of papers and comment on them, and it takes all a long time, but in the end it shows some effect. At least that's what we experience in Germany. It pays to go there and work.
I would like to give some opportunity to the audience to ask questions or put remarks forward. Just come forward and I'll give you a wireless microphone. And for all audience members that want to say something, please introduce yourself shortly.
Hi, I'm Phil Zimmerman, and I'd like to offer some suggestions for what we have to do about this problem. We're going to have some public advocacy organizations such as EPIC in the United States and Privacy International in Europe, maybe some other groups that they want to lend their efforts to this. We have to have technical assistance to these organizations. Perhaps the panelists might offer their assistance to these organizations. And we have to do fundraising, because we're going to have to do raising. We have to raise public awareness to outside the limits of these special conferences, where the only people that come to them are people that are close to this technology, that are close to these issues. We have to be able to advertise or to raise public awareness in the media, in the press at large. This is going to take money. We have to somehow get our companies that we all work for to pitch in some money to these efforts. And we have to reach the legislative bodies in the various countries where you all live that are considering this kind of the Council of Europe stuff, for example. We have to be able to reach the operators of these mobile phone providers. That means to reach those operators, we're going to have to identify particular decision makers within the organizations. We have to communicate directly with them, perhaps from I think we're Privacy International, to reach out and identify who it is that we talk to. And all of this takes effort and it takes money. But you know, we just went through the 1990s struggling to lift the export controls in the United States and lift the domestic controls in France on cryptography. And we were successful in that case. And we had some partial success in the UK about crypto policy, although we still have a ways to go with that. We have a track record of being able to get results when enough effort is applied. And I think that this coming decade, that privacy will be, for this coming decade, like the ecology movement was to the 1970s. If we apply ourselves to this problem, we can get results. If we just describe the problem in a kind of a passive way, saying this is what will happen, then we become passive and we don't apply ourselves to the inevitable, changing the inevitable outcome. We have to view these outcomes as not inevitable, but something that we can change. We have to apply an enormous effort to change things. Well, anyway, I hope that wasn't too obvious, but that's my observation.
Just want to add one thing to that. The only argument you can talk to the operators to is economic arguments. So what you need to understand is that due to the DOTS problem, the operators are in a state of sheer economic panic. They are really, really, really panicking. And everything that sounds vaguely like, okay, that could diminish my DOTS profits, would be thrown out. So the argument that needs to be given to the operators, people of the operators, is that people are caring about privacy, and what we need to get out there is an image of a lot of people in the press that are concerned about their location privacy. So the only thing that will help there is giving them the feeling that if they don't care for the privacy problem in the DOTS setup, then people will simply not pay their bills in the amount that they want to have. So, and that's the only kind of argument we will listen to.
I want to thank Phil for raising the fundraising issue, and I do accept credit cards and money orders and so on and so forth. But it's true. There's a lot of people in this process. For example, on the Council of Europe and the G8, these are very powerful forces. If you thought the crypto wars in the US were bad, add 43 other departments of justice to this whole process. And those are the forces we're fighting. And when it comes down to it, within NGOs around the world, there are only 5 of us, 5 individuals within these NGOs who are working on these issues. You know what? I'm not that intelligent. We need smarter people out there to do it. So if you want to do anything on these issues, if it's not giving me money, at least do something on these issues. Please do send me an email.
Anybody who wants to ask something or has a remark or comment?
It's Peter Exodus, mate. Yeah, I've just got a slight concern. I think what Phil said about being able to defeat odious regulation may be true, but with something like crypto laws came down because there were very strong commercial interests that said, well, we want to have crypto for e-commerce. And it seems that politically, on the privacy issue, we're facing a very big task in trying to actually co-opt political organisations to take this issue seriously and not just essentially platitudinous regulations rather than serious regulations. And it seems like one alternative might be at the protocol layer. That may be the only defence that the technical community has. If you can, for example, design the phones so that the phones use instead of one pseudonym, but generate pseudonyms on request, and maybe route traffic securely between phones, that sort of thing, then that may be a defense strategy that the technical community can use that can overcome the political forces against them. Is there anyone doing this sort of work?